The sun hung like a burning coin in the endless sky, casting long shadows across the parched grasslands of the Arizona Territory. It was the summer of 1882, and the land seemed to shimmer with heat, creating illusions of water where only dust and sage existed. The red rock formations jutted from the earth like ancient sentinels, their surfaces carved by wind and time into shapes that spoke of eternity and isolation. Clara Mitchell stood on the wooden porch of her weathered cabin, one hand shading her eyes as she watched the horizon. At 26, she was already marked by the hardships of frontier life, her fair skin bronzed by the sun, her hands roughened by labor, but her green eyes still held a spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. Her blonde hair, once her pride, was now pulled back in a practical bun, wisps escaping to frame her face in the hot breeze. The cabin sat on the outskirts of Dry Creek, a settlement that barely deserved the name town. It consisted of a general store, a saloon, a makeshift church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and a scattering of homes and businesses stretched along a dusty main street. Clara's place was a mile from the town proper, isolated enough that she could hear the coyotes at night and see the stars without the interference of lamplight. She had been alone for 2 years now, ever since consumption took her husband Samuel. The townspeople had expected her to sell the property and move back east to her family, or at least into town where a widow might find work as a seamstress or schoolteacher. But Clara had stayed, working the small vegetable garden, raising chickens, and taking in washing to make ends meet. Her stubbornness had earned her a reputation. Some admired her grit, while others whispered that it wasn't proper for a woman to live alone so far from civilization. "Mama, I'm hungry," a small voice called from inside the cabin. Clara turned to see her son Thomas peering through the doorway. At 4 years old, he had his father's dark hair but her green eyes, a combination that made him striking even as a child. He was her reason for enduring, her anchor in a world that often felt too vast and unforgiving. "I'll start supper soon, sweetheart," she said, ruffling his hair. "Why don't you go gather the eggs while I finish hanging the wash?" As Thomas scampered toward the chicken coop, Clara returned to her chores, trying to ignore the gnawing worry in her stomach. The general store owner, Mr. Garrett, had extended her credit for months, but his patience was wearing thin. The mortgage payment was overdue, and the bank manager had made it clear during her last visit to town that his sympathy had limits. The afternoon was wearing on when Clara realized she needed to make the trip to town for supplies. The flour bin was nearly empty, and Thomas needed new shoes. His toes were pushing through the current pair. She hitched her old mare, Buttercup, to the rickety wagon and lifted Thomas onto the seat beside her. The journey to Dry Creek usually took an hour, following a trail that wound between stands of mesquite and palo verde trees. But as they traveled, Clara noticed the sky beginning to change. What had been crystal blue was now taking on an ominous brown tinge to the southwest. Her heart sank. A dust storm was building. She urged Buttercup to a faster pace, but the mare was old and the wagon heavy with the washing she was delivering to town. The wind began to pick up, sending tumbleweeds racing across their path. Thomas pressed closer to her side, his small hand gripping her sleeve. They were still 3 miles from town when the storm hit in earnest. The wall of dust engulfed them like a living thing. Turning day into twilight, Clara pulled her shawl over Thomas's head and tried to guide Buttercup forward, but the mare was panicking, pulling against the reins. Then, through the howling wind and stinging sand, a shot rang out. Buttercup reared, breaking free from the wagon traces, and bolted into the storm. Clara barely managed to grab Thomas and leap from the wagon before it tipped, spilling her carefully washed linens into the dust. She crouched behind the overturned wagon, clutching her son, heart pounding. The visibility was near zero, but she could hear voices, rough, angry voices arguing in the wind. Raiders, perhaps, or bandits taking advantage of the storm. Clara reached for the old pistol Samuel had taught her to use, kept under the wagon seat, but it had been thrown clear in the crash. A figure emerged from the dust, tall, moving with purpose rather than panic. Clara's breath caught as she realized it wasn't one of the voices she'd heard. This man moved differently, silently despite the chaos around him. As he drew closer, she could make out his features: high cheekbones, long black hair whipping in the wind, the distinctive dress of an Apache warrior. Their eyes met across the swirling dust, and time seemed to pause. He was perhaps 30 years old, with a face that spoke of hardship and strength. A rifle was slung across his back, and his hand rested on the knife at his belt, but he made no threatening moves. "You are in danger," he said, his English accented but clear. "Men come this way, 3 of them. They chase my horses." Clara found her voice. "Are you—" She stopped, unsure what to ask. "Are you friend or foe? Are you one of the Apache who had been raiding settlements to the south?" "I am Taza," he said simply. "Come. There is shelter in the rocks. The storm will hide us." She had seconds to decide. The voices were getting closer, and she could hear the jingle of spurs. These were white men, possibly from her own town, but something in their harsh laughter made her skin crawl. She looked at the Apache warrior, this man her people called enemy, and made her choice. "Thomas," she whispered to her son, "we're going to go with this man. Be very quiet and hold tight to me." Taza led them away from the wagon, moving through the storm as if he could see clearly despite the blinding dust. Clara struggled to keep up, carrying Thomas, her skirts tangling around her legs, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. They reached an outcropping of rocks. Taza guided them into a shallow cave, really more of a deep overhang, but it provided blessed relief from the scouring wind. Inside, Clara could finally see properly. The cave showed signs of use: a fire ring, some stored wood, a water gourd hanging from a projection in the rock. Taza had been here before. "Your men will think the storm took you," he said, beginning to build a small fire with practiced efficiency. "They will not search here." "They're not my men," Clara said quickly. "I don't know who they are." Taza glanced at her, something like surprise flickering across his stoic features. "You trust an Apache over your own kind." Clara held Thomas closer, feeling the weight of the moment. "I trust a man who offers help over men who shoot at women and children." A slight smile touched Taza's lips, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. He produced a blanket from somewhere and handed it to her. "The storm will last hours. Rest." As the fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls, Clara studied her unlikely protector. Everything she had been told about the Apache spoke of savagery and violence. Yet here was this man sharing his shelter with enemies. She noticed scars on his arms, one particularly severe across his shoulder. Speaking of battles survived. "Why help us?" she asked softly, after Thomas had dozed off in her arms. Taza was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. 2 winters ago, soldiers came to our camp. We were at peace, had done nothing. They killed many, women, children, my sister, my mother." His voice was steady, but Clara could hear the pain beneath. "Today I track horses stolen from us. I find you instead. Perhaps the spirits say I should save instead of seek vengeance." Clara felt her throat tighten. She had heard of such attacks, dismissed by the town as necessary actions against hostiles. But looking at the grief etched in Taza's face, she saw a different truth. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I lost my husband 2 years ago, not to violence, but to sickness. Still, loss is loss." They sat in companionable silence as the storm raged outside. Clara found herself studying the way the firelight played across Taza's features, the careful way he tended the fire to keep the smoke minimal, the gentle manner in which he draped the blanket around her and Thomas. As night fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, they began to talk. Taza spoke of the land before the settlers came, of traditions being lost, of a people caught between worlds. Clara shared her own struggles, the loneliness, the daily fight for survival, the weight of raising a child alone in an unforgiving land. "Your people think you weak for living alone," Taza observed. "My people would see strength." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "I don't feel strong most days. Today," I couldn't even make it to town without disaster finding me. Yet you survive. You protect your young. You face each day though it brings hardship. This is strength." Their eyes met across the fire, and Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Here in this cave, with the storm sealing them away from the world and its prejudices, she saw not an Apache warrior, but simply a man, one who understood loss and loneliness as deeply as she did. The storm continued its assault on the desert, but inside the cave, a different kind of warmth was growing. As Clara listened to Taza's low voice describing the stars his grandmother had taught him to read, she realized that for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel alone. The fire had burned low, casting ember glow across the cave walls. Outside, the wind still howled, but its fury had diminished to a mournful wail. Thomas slept deeply in Clara's arms, his small body warm and trusting against her chest. She should have been frightened. Alone in a cave with an Apache warrior, miles from any help. Instead, she felt an unexpected peace. Taza added another piece of wood to the fire, his movements economical and graceful. He had removed his rifle and laid it within reach, but not threateningly so. In the intimate light, Clara could see the weariness in his eyes, the weight of constant vigilance. "You speak English well," she observed softly, not wanting to wake Thomas. "The missionary school," Taza replied, his voice carrying a bitter edge. "They took many of us as children, said they would save our souls by killing the Apache in us." He touched a spot behind his ear. "They cut our hair, beat us for speaking our language. I learned their words but kept my spirit." Clara shifted Thomas gently, laying him on the blanket beside her. "That must have been terrible. It taught me to walk in both worlds, even if I belong to neither fully now." He looked at her directly. "Like you, perhaps. A woman alone. Neither wife nor widow in your people's eyes." The observation struck deep. Clara had felt that same sense of existing between worlds, too independent for a proper widow, too burdened by propriety to forge a completely new path. "Tell me about before," she said impulsively. "Before the soldiers, before the sorrow. What was it like?" For the first time, Taza's face softened into something approaching warmth. He spoke of summer hunts, of ceremonies under the stars, of his grandmother's stories and his sister's laughter. His voice painted pictures of a life connected to the land in ways Clara had never imagined. She found herself leaning forward, drawn by the cadence of his words. "And you?" he asked when he had finished. "What dreams did you carry before loss changed your path?" Clara considered the question. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her dreams rather than her struggles. "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted. "I loved books, loved learning. Samuel promised that once we were settled, once the ranch was profitable, I could start a school." She gave a rueful laugh. "The land had other plans." "You could still teach," Taza said. "Your son learns from you every day." "It's not the same. I wanted—" She paused, surprised by the emotion welling up. "I wanted to matter, I suppose, to build something lasting. The Apache believe that what we build in others' hearts is more lasting than what we build with hands." Taza said, "A lesson taught with love echoes through generations." Their eyes met and held. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward. Clara became acutely aware of the space between them, of the way the firelight caught in his dark eyes, of her own quickened breathing. "I should not be here," Taza said suddenly, though he made no move to leave. "Your people would—" "My people are not here," Clara interrupted, surprising herself with her vehemence. "And those men earlier, shooting at everything, they're not my people either. I don't know what my people are anymore." The raw honesty of her words hung in the air. Taza moved then, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He reached out and touched the back of her hand where it rested on the cave floor. Just a touch, fingers barely grazing skin, but Clara felt it like lightning through her whole body. "Clara," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "You shine with your own light. Do not let others' darkness diminish it." She turned her hand palm up, letting their fingers intertwine. His hand was calloused from weapons and work, yet gentle. "I haven't felt light in so long," she whispered. "Just survival, day after day." "Survival can become living again," he said. "The heart learns to beat new rhythms after it breaks." Clara found herself moving closer, drawn by something beyond reason. The loneliness of 2 years seemed to concentrate into this moment, this unexpected connection with someone who understood loss and endurance. When Taza reached up to touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, she leaned into the touch. "This is not wise," he murmured, even as he moved closer. "Nothing in my life has been wise." Clara replied, "Safe choices have brought me only sorrow." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable as sunrise. Gentle at first, a question asked and answered, then deeper, two souls recognizing each other across all the barriers their worlds had built. Clara's hands found their way to his hair, freed from its leather binding, while his arms encircled her with a tenderness that made her want to weep. They pulled apart, breathing hard, foreheads touching. The storm outside had quieted to occasional gusts, but neither noticed. "Clara," Taza said again, wonder in his voice. "I did not expect—" "Neither did I," she admitted. "But I'm glad." "Whatever tomorrow brings, I'm glad for this moment." Thomas stirred in his sleep, a small reminder of the world beyond the cave. Clara glanced at her son, then back at Taza. "He's all I have left of my old life," she said softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough to raise him right, to protect him from all the hardness of this land." Taza's hand covered hers. Strength is not only in the arm that holds the rifle. It is in the heart that loves despite loss, the spirit that rises with each dawn. Your son will learn this from you. They talked through the night, sharing stories and silences with equal comfort. Clara learned that Taza was a leader among his people, respected for his wisdom as much as his skill in battle. He learned that she had come from Pennsylvania, following a husband's dream to the frontier, only to find herself trapped by his debts and her own determination not to fail. As the first pale light of dawn began to seep into the cave, they both knew their time was ending. The storm had passed, leaving the desert washed clean and gleaming. Soon, Clara would need to find her wagon, salvage what she could, and return to her life. Taza would resume his search for the stolen horses. "I must go," Taza said quietly. "Your people will search when you don't return. It's better if they don't find you with me." Clara nodded, throat tight. Will we meet again?" Taza was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for the leather cord around his neck, pulling it over his head. A small copper bracelet hung from it, etched with the image of an eagle in flight. "My grandmother made this for me when I became a warrior. It carries protection and promise." He placed it in Clara's palm, closing her fingers around it. "I cannot promise when or how," he said, "but the eagle always returns to the sky it knows. And my heart will remember this night, this cave, this woman who saw me not as enemy, but as man." Clara clutched the bracelet, feeling the weight of unspoken promises. "Then this is not goodbye," she said firmly. "Just a parting." Taza smiled then, a full smile that transformed his face. "The Apache do not say goodbye. We say, until the path brings us together again." He gathered his rifle and what few supplies he had, preparing to leave. At the cave entrance, he paused. "Follow the base of the rocks north. You'll find a deer trail that leads back to the main road. Your wagon should be half a mile from there." "Taza," Clara called as he turned to go. He looked back. "Thank you, for the shelter, for—" Words failed her. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for reminding me that gentleness is not weakness, that two people's hatred need not live in every heart." Then he was gone, melting into the morning shadows with the skill of his people. Clara sat for a moment longer, the copper bracelet warm in her hand, Thomas beginning to stir beside her. The night felt like a dream, except for the lingering warmth where Taza's lips had touched hers, the echo of his voice in the quiet cave. She woke Thomas gently, gathered the blanket Taza had left for them, and prepared to return to her life. But she was not the same woman who had entered the cave. Something had awakened in the storm and firelight, something that sang of possibilities beyond the narrow boundaries of her world. As she carried Thomas along the path Taza had described, the bracelet hidden beneath her bodice, Clara Mitchell allowed herself to hope for the first time in 2 years. The eagle would return to its sky, and her heart, so long closed to anything but duty and survival, had learned to beat new rhythms indeed. 5 years had passed since the night of the dust storm. 5 years of scorching summers and bitter winters, of failed crops and small victories, of Thomas growing from a frightened child into a boy of 9 with thoughtful eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Clara stood at the same window where she had once watched for Samuel's return. But now she watched Thomas help their neighbor, old Pete Watson, mend a fence. The boy had strong hands for his age, and a way with animals that seemed almost mystical. The townspeople had begun to notice things about Thomas, the way his skin bronzed deeper than his father's ever had, the slight tilt to his eyes, the black hair that refused to lie flat no matter how much pomade Clara applied. The whispers had started 2 years ago when Martha Henderson had commented at the general store that Thomas looked exotic for having such fair parents. Clara had claimed Mediterranean blood on Samuel's side, but the lie sat heavy on her tongue. As Thomas grew, the Apache features became harder to hide, and Clara found herself both proud and terrified. She touched the hidden bracelet beneath her collar, a gesture that had become habit over the years. The copper had worn smooth from her fingers, but the eagle remained clear. Some nights, she still dreamed of firelight and gentle hands, of a voice that understood sorrow and survival. The winter of 1886 had been the worst yet. The cattle belonging to the big ranches had died by the thousands, frozen where they stood. Clara had survived by taking in more washing, mending, and doing whatever honest work she could find. But the mortgage holder, Jacob Morrison from the bank, had grown impatient. "Mrs. Mitchell," he had said during his last visit, his pale eyes roaming over her cabin with calculating assessment. "You're 3 months behind. I've been more than patient, considering your situation." The pause before situation had been weighted with meaning. Clara knew what the town said about her, a woman too proud to remarry, too stubborn to know her place. Some of the uglier gossip suggested she entertained men for money, though Clara had never allowed any man past her threshold since Samuel died. "I'll have your money, Mr. Morrison," she had replied, chin high. "The Anderson Ranch owes me for 2 months of washing. Perhaps we could come to another arrangement," Morrison had suggested, moving closer. The smell of his pomade had made her stomach turn. "A woman like you must get lonely." Clara had shown him the door with the business end of her shotgun, but she knew she had made an enemy. Morrison had the power to take her home, and he would use it. Now, as spring struggled to assert itself against winter's grip, Clara faced another crisis. The well had gone dry. Without water, she couldn't keep the garden, couldn't maintain even the pretense of making the land profitable. The nearest water was a stream 2 miles away, fine for occasional trips, but impossible for daily needs. Thomas came in as she was counting their meager savings for the 10th time, hoping the numbers would somehow change. "Ma," he said, his young voice serious. "Mister, Watson says there's Apache sign near Skeleton Ridge. Says they're getting bolder, coming closer to town." Clara's heart stuttered. "Apache sign?" "Tracks," he said. "Unshod ponies. Sheriff's organizing a patrol." Thomas washed his hands in the last of their water. "Why don't the Apache like us?" "Ma, we never did anything to them." Clara looked at her son, their son, and fought for the right words. "It's complicated. Thomas, there's been wrong on both sides. The Apache were here first, and we've taken their land. They're angry, and anger makes people do harsh things. But you always say anger doesn't solve anything," Thomas pointed out with a child's clear logic. "No," Clara agreed softly. "It doesn't." That night, word came that the patrol had exchanged fire with a small band of Apache near the ridge. No one killed, but tensions were rising. The saloon talk grew ugly, full of calls for the army to clear out the savages once and for all. Clara lay awake, wondering if Taza was among those warriors, if he was safe, if he ever thought of the cave and what had passed between them. The copper bracelet seemed to burn against her skin. 3 days later, she made the difficult decision to go to town and beg for an extension on the mortgage. She dressed in her best remaining dress, pinned her hair severely, and tried to look like a respectable widow deserving of compassion. The town was buzzing with activity when she arrived. A troop of cavalry had arrived from Fort Huachuca, their blue uniforms a stark contrast to the dusty streets. Clara left Thomas at the general store with Mrs. Garrett and made her way to the bank. Morrison kept her waiting an hour before seeing her, a petty power play that set her teeth on edge. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, not rising from behind his desk. "I assume you've brought my money?" "Mr. Morrison, the well has gone dry. I need—" "What you need," he interrupted, "is to accept reality. You can't manage that property alone. I'm prepared to offer you a generous price for the land, enough to buy passage back east and start over. That's my home," Clara said firmly. "My son's inheritance. I won't sell." Morrison's face darkened. "Then you have 2 weeks to pay in full, all of it, or I'll have the sheriff remove you." Clara left the bank feeling hollow. On the street, she nearly collided with a group of cavalry soldiers. One of them, a sergeant with kind eyes, steadied her. "Pardon, ma'am, you all right?" "Yes, thank you." Clara gathered herself. "Is it true? About the Apache raids?" The sergeant nodded grimly. "Afraid so, ma'am. Small band, but they're hitting the supply lines. We'll clear them out soon enough. You living outside town, you should be careful. These savages don't distinguish between soldiers and civilians." Clara murmured something appropriate and moved on, but the word savages echoed in her mind. She thought of Taza's gentle hands, his profound grief for his family, his understanding of her own loss. Savage? No, human, complicated. Caught in an impossible situation, but not savage. As she collected Thomas from the store, "Mrs." Garrett pulled her aside. "Clara, dear, I've been meaning to speak with you." The older woman's voice was kind but firm. "People are talking. About Thomas." Clara's spine stiffened. "People always talk. It's his look, dear, and the way he moves, tracks animals. Very unusual for a town-raised boy." "Mrs." Garrett lowered her voice. "Was there something you haven't told us about Samuel's family? Some mixing of blood, perhaps?" "I don't see how that's anyone's business," Clara replied coolly. "It becomes everyone's business if it brings trouble to our door." "Mrs." Garrett said. "With the Apache acting up, people are nervous. They look for enemies everywhere, even among neighbors." The threat was subtle but clear. Clara took Thomas's hand and left without purchasing anything, though they desperately needed supplies. On the ride home, Thomas was quiet. Finally, he asked, "Ma, why was Mrs. Garrett asking about Pa's family?" Clara's hands tightened on the reins. "Some people judge others by how they look rather than who they are. It's wrong, but it's the world we live in." "Do I look different?" Thomas asked, and the uncertainty in his voice broke her heart. "You look perfect," Clara said fiercely. "You have your father's strength and your mother's spirit, and don't let anyone tell you different." But as they approached their cabin, Clara saw fresh hoofprints in the dust, unshod ponies. Her blood chilled, then warmed as she recognized something in the pattern, a way of moving she had observed 5 years ago, that night after Thomas was asleep. Clara sat by the window with her shotgun across her lap. The moon was new, the darkness complete. Every sound might be danger, or it might be hope. Near midnight, a pebble struck the window, soft, deliberate. Clara's heart pounded as she slipped outside, shotgun ready. A figure emerged from the shadows by the barn. Even in darkness, she knew him. "Taza," she breathed. He stepped into the faint starlight, and her heart clenched. 5 years had added lines to his face, a scar across his jaw. But his eyes were the same, dark and deep and knowing. "Clara," he said, and her name was still a prayer. "I should not be here, but I heard the well failed. Saw you in town today. You looked—" He paused, troubled. "How long have you been watching?" she asked, torn between joy and fear. "Long enough to see the boy." Taza said quietly, "He has my mother's way of walking, my grandfather's hands." Clara's eyes filled with tears she had not allowed herself in years. "I didn't know how to find you, how to tell you, and then the raid started, and I thought that I was dead, or that I had forgotten." Taza moved closer, and suddenly the years collapsed. Not one day, Clara, not one day passed without remembering. They stood inches apart, drinking in each other's presence. Then Taza reached out, fingers barely touching her cheek, and Clara shattered. The tears came then. For all the lonely years, the struggles, the weight of their secret. "He's beautiful," Taza whispered. "Strong. You have done well." "They're starting to guess." Clara said, "The town, they see you in him." Taza's face hardened. "This brings danger to you both. We've survived this long." "The war grows worse." Taza said, "My people are being pushed to the breaking point. Soon there will be nowhere left to run. The soldiers mean to end us, one way or another." "Then come away," Clara said impulsively. "Take us with you, somewhere beyond the territory, where no one knows us." Taza's smile was sad. "You would leave your world for mine? You do not know what you ask. The running, the hunger, the constant fear. It is no life for you, for him. And this is," Clara gestured toward the cabin, "bankruptcy, prejudice, raising our son to be ashamed of half his blood. At least with you. He would know who he is." "Our son," Taza repeated, wonder in his voice. He was silent for a long moment. "I lead 20 people, all that remains of my band. We hide in the mountains, moving always. It is why I could not come before. To lead them here would bring death to your door. And staying brings a different kind of death," Clara said, "a slow strangling of the spirit. I see it in Thomas already, the questions he's afraid to ask." Taza pulled something from his belt, a leather pouch. "I brought this gold from the old mines, enough perhaps to save your land." Clara looked at the gold, then at him. "I don't want gold, I want—" She stopped, afraid to voice the impossible dream. "What do you want, Clara?" His voice was rough with emotion. "You," she said simply. "Us, a place where our son can be proud of both bloods that run in his veins. I know it's impossible, but—" Taza silenced her with a kiss. 5 years of longing condensed into a moment. When they parted, both breathing hard, he pressed the gold into her hands. "Not impossible," he said. "Difficult, dangerous, but not impossible. There are places in Mexico where Apache and white have learned to live side by side, but the journey would be worth it." Clara finished. Taza glanced toward the cabin where Thomas slept. "He does not know me, would not understand." "Then we teach him," Clara said. "You taught me that first night that understanding comes from sharing stories, sharing sorrows. He's your son, he'll understand." "My son," Taza repeated, and his voice broke on the words. They talked until the eastern sky began to lighten, making plans that seemed equal parts desperate and hopeful. Taza would return to his band, prepare them for the possibility of sanctuary seekers. Clara would use the gold to satisfy Morrison, buying time to prepare for a journey that would change everything. As dawn approached, Taza prepared to leave. 2 moons, he said. "When the moon is new again, if you are certain, tie a white cloth to the fence post. I will come. I'll be certain," Clara said. He touched her face once more, then melted into the growing light with the same fluid grace she remembered. Clara stood in her doorway, the pouch of gold heavy in her hands, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Inside, Thomas was stirring. Soon she would need to make breakfast, face another day of pretense, but now she had hope, dangerous and wild as the land itself. The eagle would return to its sky, and this time, she would have the courage to fly with it. Spring arrived with unusual vigor that year, painting the desert in brilliant splashes of yellow brittlebush and purple lupine. Clara had paid Morrison with Taza's gold, watching his face twist with disappointment and suspicion as she counted out the coins. The reprieve had bought her time, but also increased scrutiny. Morrison had clearly expected her to fail. The town itself had transformed with the presence of the cavalry. Blue uniforms were everywhere, and with them came a harder edge to the frontier settlement. The soldiers drank heavily at the saloon, brawled in the streets, and spoke of the Apache with a casual brutality that made Clara's stomach turn. Captain William Thornton, who led the detachment, was a man with cold gray eyes and ambitions that extended beyond military glory. Clara kept her head down and her ears open, gathering supplies and information in equal measure. She learned that Geronimo had surrendered, that the Apache resistance was crumbling across the territory. But she also heard whispers of small bands still free in the mountains. Renegades who refused to accept defeat. 2 weeks after Taza's visit, Clara noticed Thomas watching her with those two knowing eyes of his. "You're different, Ma," he said over supper, "like you're waiting for something." Clara's hand stilled on her coffee cup. "What makes you say that? You look out the window more, and sometimes you touch that necklace you wear under your dress." His young face was serious. "Is someone coming?" The boy was too perceptive by half. Clara set down her cup carefully. "Thomas, if I told you we might be going on a journey soon, what would you think?" His eyes lit up. "Away from here? To somewhere new?" "Yes, somewhere very different. It would be hard, maybe dangerous. We'd have to leave everything behind." Thomas glanced around the spare cabin. "There's nothing here I'd miss, except maybe Buttercup." Clara's heart ached at his easy dismissal of the only home he'd known. Had she made his life here so unhappy? "Can I ask you something, Ma?" Thomas fidgeted with his spoon. "Am I different from the other boys?" "What do you mean?" "Billy Morrison says I look like a half-breed, says his PA told him to stay away from me." The hurt in his voice was carefully hidden, but still audible. "What's a half-breed?" Clara had known this moment would come, but she wasn't prepared for the pain of it. She moved to sit beside him, taking his hands in hers. "Thomas, you know I loved your father Samuel very much." She took a breath. "But there are things about your birth I haven't told you. Not because I'm ashamed, but because the world we live in wouldn't understand." Thomas watched her with those dark, intelligent eyes. Taza's eyes. "Your real father," Clara continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "is a brave and good man, but he's Apache." The silence stretched between them. Thomas pulled his hands free, confusion and something like betrayal crossing his face. "Apache? But everyone says they're savages. They kill people." "Some do," Clara said honestly, "just as some white men kill. Your father saved us once, during a storm. He was kind and gentle and understood sorrow. That's not savage, Thomas. That's human." "Does he know about me?" "Yes, he's watched you grow. From a distance. He's proud of you." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a small voice, "Is that why I'm different? Why I can track better than Mr. Watson? Why animals come to me? Those are gifts from your father's blood." Clara said, "You should be proud of them." "Will I meet him?" Clara pulled him close. "Would you want to?" Thomas leaned against her, processing this upheaval of his world. "I think so. Maybe. Is he why we might leave?" "Partly, but also because I'm tired of hiding who we are, of making you ashamed of gifts you should celebrate." "I'm not ashamed," Thomas said, but uncertainty colored his words. That night, Clara told him stories of Taza, carefully edited, but true in their essence. By morning, Thomas seemed to have absorbed this new knowledge with the resilience of youth, though she caught him studying his reflection in the water bucket with new interest. The days passed with agonizing slowness. Clara began preparing quietly, mending clothes, drying meat, gathering supplies that could travel. She told no one, trusted no one. The white cloth waited in her sewing basket, ready for the appointed night. Then, a week before the new moon, everything changed. Clara was returning from the stream with water when she saw the horses outside her cabin, military mounts. Her blood chilled. She set down the buckets and approached cautiously. Captain Thornton emerged from her doorway. Thomas held firmly by the shoulder. Her son's face was pale but defiant. "Mrs. Mitchell," Thornton said, touching his hat mockingly. "Your boy and I have been having an interesting conversation." "Let him go," Clara said, fighting to keep her voice level. "Oh, I will. Just wanted to meet the woman the whole town's talking about." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Living alone, refusing honest offers of help, makes a man wonder what you're hiding. "I'm hiding nothing. This is my home, and you have no right—" "I have every right," Thornton interrupted. "There's been an Apache sign near here. For all I know, you're signaling them, helping them. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" He released Thomas, who ran to Clara's side. "Boy moves like an Indian, tracks like one too. From what I hear, makes a man wonder about his bloodline." Clara's hand found Thomas's shoulder, gripping tight. "My husband's family had some Mexican blood. Is that a crime now?" Thornton smiled coldly. "Mexican, Apache, all savages in my book. You do well to remember that there's a war on, Mrs. Mitchell. Those who aid the enemy are enemies themselves." He mounted his horse with casual arrogance. "I'll be watching. One wrong move, one signal to your Mexican friends, and I'll see you hanged for treason. The boy too, if necessary." They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Clara shaking with rage and fear. Thomas looked up at her, eyes wide. "Ma, I didn't tell him anything. He just kept asking questions about Pa, about why I look—" "I know, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong." Clara knelt and hugged him fiercely. "But we need to be very careful now." That night, she barely slept. Every sound could be soldiers returning, or worse. When dawn came without incident, she made a decision. They couldn't wait for the new moon. It was too dangerous. She spent the day acting normally, even making a show of working in the garden where neighbors could see. But that night, she packed their most essential belongings and prepared to flee. They were saddling Buttercup in the darkness when hoofbeats made them freeze. Clara pushed Thomas behind the barn and raised her rifle. "Clara!" The voice came soft from the darkness. Taza materialized from the shadows, but he wasn't alone. 4 Apache warriors flanked him, their faces painted for war. "Taza," she breathed. "The soldiers came. They suspect—" "I know. We saw." He moved quickly to them, his eyes finding Thomas in the darkness. The boy stared at his father with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Thomas," Clara said softly, "this is your father." Taza knelt, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "You have grown strong," he said simply. "I am proud." Thomas studied him with those familiar eyes. "You're the one who saved us in the storm." "Yes. Ma says you're good, that you're not like what people say. People say many things. What matters is what you see with your own eyes. Judge with your own heart." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, with a child's directness, "Are you taking us away?" "If you will come. The journey is dangerous, but staying is more dangerous now." One of the warriors said something sharp in Apache. Taza responded, then turned back to Clara. "The soldiers patrol heavily. We must go now, travel hard through the night." "We're ready," Clara said. But as they prepared to leave, torches appeared on the road, many torches, moving fast. "They're coming," Clara whispered. Taza's face hardened. He spoke rapidly to his companions, who melted back into the darkness. To Clara, he said, "Take the boy. Ride north to Skeleton Ridge. We will delay them." "No," Clara said. "We stay together or—" Gunfire erupted, cutting off her words. The cavalry had arrived in force, Thornton at their head. In the chaos of shots and shouts, Taza pushed Clara and Thomas toward the horses. "Go, now!" But Thomas broke free, running not away but toward the cabin. "My father's books!" he cried. "Thomas, no!" Clara screamed. Taza didn't hesitate. He sprinted after the boy as bullets whined overhead. The cabin door burst open just as they reached it, soldiers pouring through. Taza shoved Thomas aside and met the first soldier with his knife. The struggle was brief and vicious. Clara saw Thornton raise his pistol, aiming at Taza's back. Without thought, she fired her rifle. Thornton spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. "Apache lovers!" someone shouted. "Kill them all!" In the melee that followed, Taza fought with desperate fury, trying to clear a path to Clara and Thomas. The Apache warriors had engaged the soldiers from the darkness, their war cries adding to the chaos. Clara reloaded and fired, keeping soldiers at bay, while Thomas huddled against the barn wall. Then Taza was there, bloody but alive. He swept Thomas up with one arm, grabbed Clara's hand with the other. Now, while they're confused, they ran for the horses. Behind them, the cabin caught fire, whether from a kicked-over lantern or deliberate action. Clara never knew. The flames leaped high, illuminating their flight. Somehow they made it to the horses. Taza lifted Thomas onto his own mount, swung Clara up on Buttercup. As they galloped into the darkness, Clara looked back once at her burning home, at the only life Thomas had known going up in flames. But ahead lay the unknown desert, and freedom, and a man who had risked everything to save them. The choice, in the end, had been no choice at all. They rode hard through the night, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. When dawn touched the eastern mountains, they were miles from any settlement, in country wild and free. Taza reined in on a high ridge, breathing hard. Blood seeped from a gash on his arm. As Clara bound the wound, he looked at Thomas, who had been silent throughout the wild ride. "You were brave," Taza told his son. "Foolish to go back, but brave." "I wanted something of Samuel," Thomas said in a small voice. "He raised me. I loved him too." Taza's face softened. "Then he was a good man. Love is never wrong, even when it's complicated." As the sun rose higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, Clara realized their old life was truly over. They were outlaws now, fugitives from a world that couldn't accept their love or their son. But looking at Taza's proud face, at Thomas beginning to smile as his father pointed out tracks in the dust, Clara felt no regret. They had chosen love over law, family over safety. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They had been running for 3 days. The small band moved like ghosts through the harsh terrain, using Apache knowledge passed down through generations, traveling at night when possible, hiding in caves and canyon shadows during the day. Taza's warriors had rejoined them after the fight, bringing news that Thornton lived but was badly wounded. The cavalry was searching, but for now, they had lost the trail. Clara had never imagined she could endure such hardship. Her soft life, even with its struggles, had not prepared her for sleeping on bare rock, for the constant gnawing hunger, for the fear that dogged every step. But when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she would catch sight of Thomas riding with his father, learning to read signs in the earth and sky, and her resolve would strengthen. The band consisted of 20 souls, warriors, women, children, and elders. They had accepted Clara with wary courtesy, though she caught the sidelong glances, heard the whispered discussions in a language she didn't understand. She was the enemy by blood, the reason they now fled with cavalry on their heels. Only Taza's position as leader and the obvious evidence of Thomas kept open hostility at bay. On the 4th night, they made camp in a hidden valley where a small spring provided precious water. Clara collapsed against a boulder, every muscle screaming. Thomas, remarkably, seemed to be thriving. The boy who had been quiet and withdrawn in town now moved with new confidence, absorbing his father's teachings like drought-hardened earth soaking up rain. "Your son is strong," a voice said in accented English. Clara looked up to see an elderly Apache woman watching her. This was Nali, Taza's aunt, one of the few who had shown her any warmth. "He's finding himself," Clara replied. Nali settled beside her with the careful movements of age. "As are you. It is not easy, leaving one world for another. I'd do it again, Clara said firmly. For him, for them both. Nali studied her with dark, knowing eyes. Taza spoke of you these years past. We thought him foolish, holding to a dream of a white woman, but I see now what he saw, steel beneath softness. Before Clara could respond, a commotion arose at the camp's edge. One of the warriors ran in, speaking urgently. Taza's face darkened as he listened. What is it? Clara asked, though she feared the answer. Soldiers, Taza said grimly. A day behind, maybe less, and worse. They have Apache scouts with them, traders who hunt their own kind for silver. Fear rippled through the camp. The elders gathered the children, ready to move again despite exhaustion. Clara saw the despair in their faces. How many times had they fled like this? How many more times could they endure it? There's more, Taza continued, his jaw tight. They've put a bounty on us, on you especially, Clara. They say you murdered a captain, that you're a witch who corrupted good Christian folk. Clara laughed bitterly. Of course, a woman who chooses her own path must be a witch. This is my fault, Thomas said suddenly, his young voice cutting through the tension. If I hadn't run back for the books. No. Taza placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. Each person makes choices. You chose to honor the man who raised you. I chose to follow. Your mother chose to defend us. We bear the consequences together. That night, they pushed deeper into the mountains, into terrain so rough even the Apache found it challenging. Clara's hands bled from gripping sharp rocks. Her dress, wholly unsuitable for such travel, torn to tatters. But she didn't complain. Wouldn't show weakness before these people who had lost so much more than she had. As dawn approached, they reached a series of caves high in the cliffs. Here they could rest, post lookouts, perhaps gain time to plan. Clara found herself assigned to a small cave with Thomas and, to her surprise, Taza. The people need to see we are together, he explained quietly. That this is not just duty, but choice. As Thomas slept between them, exhausted from the night's climb, Clara and Taza talked in whispers. I've brought disaster to your people, Clara said. They were already hunted, but now we are hunted for love rather than simply for existing, Taza interrupted. Is that not better? To choose our fate rather than have it chosen for us? Philosophy won't stop bullets. No, but it helps the spirit endure what the body must suffer. He touched her face gently. Do you regret? Never, Clara said fiercely. But I fear for Thomas. What kind of life can we give him? Always running. A life where he knows who he is, where both rivers of his blood are honored. That is no small gift. The next days blurred together. Hiding, running. Brief moments of rest shattered by the need to move again. The soldiers were persistent, their Apache scouts skilled. Twice they came close enough that Clara could hear their horses, smell their tobacco smoke on the wind. It was during one such close call that tragedy struck. They were crossing a narrow canyon, moving in single file along a treacherous path. Clara was helping an elderly woman named Maria when shots rang out from above. The soldiers had found a vantage point. Take cover, Taza shouted. But there was nowhere to go on the narrow trail. Maria pushed Clara forward just as a bullet struck. The old woman crumpled, crimson spreading across her worn dress. Grandmother, one of the warriors cried out. Clara caught Maria as she fell, tried to staunch the wound. The old woman gripped her hand with surprising strength. Care for them, Maria whispered in broken English. The young ones. Promise. I promise, Clara said through tears. Maria smiled and was gone. They lost two more that day. A young warrior named Kuruk who drew fire so the others could escape, and a child who fell from the treacherous path in panic. Each death carved deeper lines in Taza's face, added weight to Clara's guilt. That night, in a cold camp without fires that might draw attention, the people mourned in near silence. Clara held Thomas as he wept for the friends he had barely begun to know. Around them, the Apache sang death songs under their breath, the melody haunting in its restrained grief. This cannot continue, Taza said to the gathered leaders. We lose more with each passing day. Then we fight, suggested Nantan, a scarred warrior. Better to die facing our enemies than running like rabbits. And accomplish what? Taza challenged. They are many, we are few. Our deaths would change nothing. Then what do you suggest? Another asked. The white woman has brought curse upon us. Clara felt the hostility rising, saw Thomas shrink against her side. But before she could speak, Nolly's voice cut through the darkness. The woman brought choice, the elder said firmly. We chose to accept her, to flee together. If this is a curse, we all share it. There is another way, Taza said slowly. The mission at San Carlos. Father Miguel, he has helped Apache before, given sanctuary. A Catholic priest, Nantan spat. They're no different from the others. This one is. Taza insisted. He sees God in all people, not just those with white skin. It's 3 days hard travel. But if we can reach it, it's a trap, someone muttered. Maybe, Taza acknowledged. But staying in these mountains is certain death. At least this offers hope. The debate continued through the night, voices rising and falling with passion and despair. Clara understood little of the Apache words, but the emotions were universal. Fear, anger, grief, and underneath it all, a desperate desire to survive. Finally, as dawn approached, a decision was reached. They would attempt to reach the mission. Those who disagreed were free to go their own way. The band would split, some heading deeper into Mexico, others taking their chances with Father Miguel's sanctuary. As the camp prepared to move, Taza found Clara standing apart, watching the sunrise paint the mountains red. You're very quiet, he observed. Maria asked me to care for the young ones. Clara said, but I'm the reason they need caring for. How do I reconcile that? By living, Taza said simply. By ensuring their sacrifice has meaning. By raising our son to build bridges where we have burned them. Can bridges be built from ashes? The strongest bridges often are. Thomas approached then, moving with the quiet steps Taza had taught him. Mother, father, he said, the titles still new on his tongue. Nolly says I can help scout today. Clara's instinct was to refuse, to keep him close and safe. But she saw the need in his eyes, the need to contribute, to be more than a burden to these people who were dying for him. Be careful, she said instead. Listen to Nolly. Come back to me. As Thomas trotted off with the old woman, proud to be trusted. Taza took Clara's hand. He'll be safe with her. Nolly could track a shadow across water. It's not his body I worry for. Clara admitted. It's his spirit. What are we teaching him with all this violence and running? We're teaching him that love is worth fighting for. Taza said, that family comes in many forms, that courage isn't the absence of fear but acting despite it. A shout from the lookout cut their conversation short. Dust on the horizon, riders approaching fast. The soldiers had found them again. Move, Taza commanded. Leave everything but weapons and water. As the band scattered into motion, Clara grabbed their meager supplies and ran. Behind them, she could hear the thunder of hooves, the shouts of pursuit. Beside her, Taza moved with grim purpose, organizing the retreat even as they fled. The mission was still 2 days away, and their pursuers were closing in. Clara prayed to whatever power might listen, Samuel's Christian God, the Apache spirits, or simply the vast, indifferent universe, that they would live to see sanctuary. The chase was on, and this time, there would be no escape but forward, into the uncertain mercy of strangers and the hope that somewhere, somehow, they could find a place where their love was not a crime and their son not an abomination. As they ran, Clara clutched the copper bracelet beneath her torn dress, remembering a night in a cave when the world had seemed full of possibility rather than peril. That hope, battered but not broken, drove her onward into the unknown. The mission bells of San Carlos rang out across the desert, their bronze voices carrying a promise of sanctuary that seemed almost cruel in its hope. Clara stood at the edge of the mesquite grove. Thomas pressed against her side, watching the adobe walls that might mean salvation or trap. They had been running for 2 weeks now, and the cost showed in every face around her. Only 12 of them remained. The others had scattered during the last pursuit, vanishing into the wilderness like smoke. Those who stayed were the most desperate, the elderly who couldn't survive alone, women with children, and the wounded who wouldn't abandon their families, and Taza, who could have escaped easily but chose to remain. "I don't like this," Nantan muttered, his hand never leaving his rifle. The warrior had lost 2 fingers in their last skirmish with the cavalry, but his suspicion remained sharp as ever. Walking into walls is what sheep do before slaughter. "Father Miguel is different," Taza insisted, though Clara could see the doubt in his eyes too. "He fed my cousin's band 2 winters ago, asked nothing in return." "That was before," Nolly said quietly. She carried her grandson on her hip, a boy of 2 whose parents lay buried in an unmarked canyon. "Before the raids increased, before they put bounties on Apache scalps." The debate might have continued, but exhaustion made the decision for them. Little Ayana, barely 6, swayed on her feet, her face gray with fatigue. Her mother, shot through the shoulder 3 days prior, could barely stand. They needed rest, medical help, food, all things the mission might provide. "I'll go first," Clara said suddenly. "Alone, they're less likely to shoot a white woman." "No," Taza said immediately. The risk is less than all of us walking in together." Clara interrupted. "Let me speak to this priest. Test his intentions. If it's safe, I'll signal." "And if it's a trap?" Thomas asked, his young voice tight with fear he tried to hide. Clara knelt beside her son. "Then you run, you and your father. You run and don't look back."
"We're not leaving you," Thomas said fiercely. "You will, if I say so," Clara replied, matching his intensity. "Promise me, Thomas, on your father's honor and mine." The boy's face crumpled, but he nodded. Taza's expression was carved from stone, but he too gave his reluctant agreement. Clara smoothed her torn dress as best she could, tried to tame her wild hair. She looked like what she was, a woman who had been living rough for weeks, but perhaps that would work in her favor. Sympathy might open doors where demands would not. The walk to the mission gates felt endless. Clara kept her hands visible, her pace steady but non-threatening. The walls loomed higher as she approached, and she could see movement on them. Guards, armed. "Stop there," a voice called in Spanish-accented English. "State your business." "I seek Father Miguel," Clara called back, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. We need sanctuary." "We?" Clara took a breath. Truth or lies? In the end, exhaustion chose for her. "My family, we're fleeing violence. Please, I must speak with Father Miguel." There was discussion above, words she couldn't catch. Then the gates opened just wide enough to admit one person. Clara stepped through, feeling like she was crossing more than just a threshold. The courtyard was simple but clean, with a well in the center and a small garden struggling in the desert heat. 2 armed men watched her closely, but their weapons remained lowered. And then, from the shadow of the arcade, came a figure in brown robes. Father Miguel was not what Clara expected. Younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 40, with kind eyes and a face marked by sun and suffering. He walked with a slight limp, and his hands, when he extended them in greeting, were scarred from labor. "Welcome, child," he said in softly accented English. "You look as if you've traveled hard roads." Something in his voice, in the genuine warmth of his greeting, broke through Clara's defenses. Tears she had held back for days suddenly threatened to spill. "Father, we need help, but I must be honest with you. My husband is Apache. Our son—" She stopped, waiting for the warmth to turn to rejection. Instead, Father Miguel's expression grew more compassionate. "And you flee together? From the soldiers?" Clara nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. The priest was quiet for a moment, studying her. Then, "How many?" 12. Women, children, elderly mostly. Warriors too, but only defending their families. "Father, if you can't, Bring them, Father Miguel interrupted. Quickly, before the afternoon patrol passes. We'll discuss the details once everyone is safe. Clara stared at him. Just like that? You don't know us, don't know what they say we've done. I know suffering when I see it. The priest replied simply, and I remember a man who also fled to Egypt with his family when powerful men sought their deaths. Go, bring your people. We'll prepare food and shelter. Clara nearly ran back to the grove, hope and fear warring in her chest. She found them exactly where she'd left them, weapons drawn, ready to flee or fight. It's safe, she said breathlessly. He'll take us in, all of us. The journey to the mission was tense despite her assurances. Warriors flanked the women and children, eyes scanning for betrayal, but the gates opened wide for them. And Father Miguel greeted each person with the same warm dignity he'd shown Clara. Welcome, he said to Taza in serviceable Apache, which drew surprised looks. Your family is safe here. The mission had seen better days. Clara realized as they were led to quarters. The walls were thick but crumbling in places. The building spare but clean. A handful of Mexican and Indian converts helped run the place, their faces showing curiosity but not hostility. They were given 2 rooms, one for the women and children, one for the men. It was the first time Clara and Taza had been separated since fleeing, and she saw the reluctance in his eyes. It's mission rules, Father Miguel explained apologetically. Appearances must be maintained, even in sanctuary, but you may visit freely during daylight hours. That evening, they gathered for a simple meal of beans, tortillas, and precious fresh water. Clara watched Thomas wolf down his portion, talking animatedly with another boy near his age. For a moment, she could almost pretend they were simply travelers, not fugitives. Father Miguel joined them as they ate, moving among them with easy grace. When he reached Clara and Taza, he sat without ceremony on the bench beside them. Now, he said quietly, tell me what brings you here. The truth, all of it. So they told him. The night in the cave, the years of separation, the violence that had driven them together and apart. Father Miguel listened without judgment, occasionally asking a clarifying question. When they finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The authorities will come looking, he said finally. Captain Thornton has made you famous. I'm afraid, murder, kidnapping, corrupting Christian morals, the charges are serious. All lies, Clara said hotly. Except I did shoot him, but he was going to kill Taza, kill all of us. I believe you, Father Miguel said. But belief and law rarely walk the same path. I can offer you sanctuary for a time, but not forever. The mission survives on the government's tolerance, if they demand you be turned over. We understand, Taza said. We're grateful for whatever time you can give us. There may be another way, the priest said thoughtfully. I have contacts in Mexico, other missions that help displaced peoples. The journey would be dangerous, but once there, you could start anew. Mixed families are not so unusual across the border. Hope, that dangerous emotion Clara thought she'd lost, stirred again in her chest. That night, despite the rules. Taza slipped into the women's quarters. The others, understanding, gave them what privacy they could in the crowded room. They sat together against the wall, Thomas sleeping between them, and talked in whispers. Do you trust him? Taza asked. This priest. I think so, Clara replied. There's something genuine about him. And what choice do we have? There's always a choice. We could go deeper into the mountains, live as my people always have. With Thomas, with the others who can barely travel another day. Clara shook her head. That's not living. Taza, that's just slower dying. He was quiet, his hand finding hers in the darkness. I wanted to give you more than this. A home, safety, a place where our son could grow proud and strong. You've given me yourself, Clara said. You've given Thomas his heritage. That's more than I dared hope for. You sound like you're saying goodbye. No, Clara said firmly. I'm saying thank you for coming back, for claiming us, for fighting for us.
Whatever happens next, I need you to know that." They held each other in the darkness, drawing strength from proximity. Outside, a coyote howled, and the mission bells marked the hours with bronze certainty. The next days passed in strange peace. The mission routine provided structure, prayers they didn't have to attend but did out of respect. Simple work that kept hands busy. Lessons for the children that Thomas devoured eagerly. Father Miguel proved to have a small library, and Clara found herself teaching Thomas and the other children to read from worn copies of books in English and Spanish. But the peace was fragile. Scouts reported increased military activity in the area. Twice, patrols came to the mission gates, but Father Miguel turned them away with calm authority and carefully worded half-truths. On the 5th day, as Clara helped in the garden, a commotion arose at the gates. She looked up to see a familiar, unwelcome figure, Jake Morrison, brother to the banker, wearing a deputy star and a cruel smile. "Afternoon, Father," Morrison said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "We're looking for some fugitives, white woman, Apache buck, half-breed boy, murderers, the lot of them." Clara froze, her hand tightening on the hoe. From the corner of her eye, she saw Taza emerge from the stable, hand moving instinctively toward where his weapons would be. Father Miguel stepped forward, calm as always. "I've seen no one matching that description. Deputy. Now, Father." Morrison's voice turned oily. "Lying's a sin, isn't it? We know they came this way. Apache scouts tracked them to within a mile of here before the trail went cold. Many people passed through seeking aid." The priest replied, "I don't interrogate them about their pasts." Morrison's eyes swept the courtyard, passed over Clara in her borrowed Mexican dress and shawl without recognition. But then Thomas emerged from the chapel, book in hand, and Morrison's face lit with triumph. Well, he said. "If it isn't the Mitchell boy. Different clothes, but I'd recognize those breed features anywhere." Everything happened at once. Morrison reached for his gun. Taza moved like lightning, putting himself between the deputy and Thomas. Clara found herself running, the hoe still in her hands. Father Miguel shouted for calm, and then, unexpectedly, the mission bells began to ring, not the measured hourly toll, but a wild, urgent clanging that filled the air with bronze chaos. The converts appeared from everywhere, surrounding the scene with silent presence, not threatening, but clearly protecting. Morrison's hand hesitated on his gun. He was outnumbered 20-1, and even his arrogance couldn't overcome those odds. "This ain't over," he snarled. "I'll be back with the whole garrison. You can't hide behind skirts and crosses forever." He backed toward the gate, hand still on his weapon. At the threshold, he turned for one last threat. "Enjoy your prayers. Breed. They'll be your last." As the gates closed behind him, Clara felt her knees buckle. Taza caught her, held her steady. "We have to go," he said urgently. "Now, before he returns." Father Miguel nodded grimly. "I'll prepare supplies. Maps to the next safe haven. You have perhaps an hour before—" A child's scream cut through his words. Little Ayana stood pointing at the wall where Morrison had exited. Smoke was rising beyond it, black and ominous. "Fire!" someone shouted. "He set fires around the mission!" The dry brush caught quickly. Flames racing along the mission's perimeter. The wooden gates, their only exit, were already beginning to char. "Water!" Father Miguel commanded. "Form bucket lines from the well!" But even as they scrambled to fight the flames, Clara could hear horses approaching. Many horses. Morrison hadn't waited for reinforcements. He'd brought them with him, hidden just out of sight. "It's a trap," Taza said grimly. "Force us out into their guns or burn us alive." Clara looked around wildly, at the families who'd trusted them, at Thomas wide-eyed with fear, at Father Miguel praying as he passed water buckets. They were trapped, and this time there seemed to be no escape. But Taza was studying the walls with a warrior's eye, and Clara saw the moment he spotted something. "There," he said, pointing to a section where the adobe had crumbled, partially hidden by a storage lean-to. "We can break through there." "All of us?" Clara asked, looking at the elderly, the wounded, the children. "We have to try," Taza said. "The alternative is certain death." As smoke filled the courtyard and flames licked higher, they prepared for one last desperate flight. Father Miguel, abandoning his neutrality, helped them gather what supplies they could. "Go with God," he said, pressing a worn map into Clara's hands. "Find Father Francisco at the Mission San Xavier. Tell him I sent you. Come with us," Clara urged. The priest smiled sadly. "My place is here, with those who cannot run. Go now, while the smoke provides cover." Taza had already begun breaking through the weakened wall, other warriors helping. As the first breach appeared, gunshots rang out. Morrison's men had seen the movement. "Go!" Taza shouted. "Women and children first!" Clara grabbed Thomas, pushed him toward the opening. Around her, others scrambled for the breach as bullets whined overhead. She saw Nali fall, clutching her side. Saw Nantan turn back to help her. Saw Father Miguel step into the open, arms spread wide, drawing fire to himself. "No!" Clara screamed, but Taza was pulling her through the gap, into the chaos beyond. They ran through smoke and gunfire, through brush that tore at clothes and skin. Behind them, the mission bells rang one last time, a death knell that would haunt Clara's dreams. Ahead lay only desert and the fading hope of another sanctuary, another chance. As they fled, Clara clutched Thomas with one hand and Taza with the other, the three of them bound by love and desperation. They had survived again, but at what cost? And how many more would pay for their freedom before they found peace? The desert swallowed them, indifferent to their struggles, while behind them the mission burned and good men died for the crime of showing mercy. The blizzard struck without mercy on their third day in the mountains. They had fled north instead of south, hoping to confuse their pursuers. But winter in the high country was its own enemy. Clara huddled with Thomas in a shallow cave, their breath forming ice crystals in the frigid air. Around them, what remained of their band, only 8 souls now, fought for survival against nature's fury. Taza had been gone since dawn, searching for better shelter. Every hour that passed without his return tightened the knot of fear in Clara's chest. The wound in his side, hastily bound after their escape from the mission, had been worse than he'd let on. She'd seen the fever beginning in his eyes, though he denied it. "Ma, I'm scared," Thomas whispered through chattering teeth. The boy who had been growing strong and confident was a child again in the face of the howling storm. "I know, sweetheart," Clara said, pulling him closer. The thin blanket they shared offered little protection. "Your father will find us shelter. He always does." But doubt gnawed at her. They had nothing left. No food, minimal water, inadequate clothing for the mountain winter. Nali lay unconscious deeper in the cave, her own wound festering despite their efforts. The others were scattered in whatever holes they'd found, waiting for death or deliverance. Then, through the white wall of snow, a figure emerged. Clara's heart leaped, then sank. It was Taza, but he moved wrong, stumbling rather than with his usual grace. He fell to his knees at the cave entrance. "Taza!" Clara scrambled to him, Thomas at her heels. Blood seeped through his side, the bandages soaked red against the snow. His skin burned with fever. "Found! Cabin!" he managed through cracked lips. "Half mile. Empty. Can make it. You can barely stand. Must." His eyes found Thomas, fierce with determination. "For him! For you!" Somehow they roused the others. Nali had to be carried between 2 of the remaining warriors. The children, only 3 left, clung to their mothers. Every step through the knee-deep snow was agony, the wind cutting through their inadequate clothing like knives. The cabin materialized from the storm like a miracle. It was small, abandoned, probably a trapper's shelter, but it had walls and a roof and a stone fireplace. They stumbled inside, collapsing on the dirt floor. "Wood," Taza gasped, fighting to stay conscious. "Need fire or we die." Clara and Thomas found a small stack of split logs in the corner, a gift from whoever had last used this place. with the numb fingers. She coaxed a flame from their last matches. The smoke drew badly at first, but then caught, and blessed warmth began to seep into the space. By firelight, Clara examined Taza's wound. The bullet had passed through, but infection had set in. Red streaks spread from the entry point, and she knew with cold certainty what that meant without proper medicine. "Boil water," she told Thomas, keeping her voice steady. "Clean cloth if you can find any." As Thomas scrambled to help, Clara met Taza's eyes. He knew, as she did, how this would likely end. But neither would speak it aloud, not with their son watching. That night, as the storm raged outside, Clara fought her own war against death. She cleaned and rebound wounds, melted snow for water, portioned out their last handful of dried meat. But it wasn't enough. Little Ayanna's mother slipped away near midnight, her body simply giving up after too much loss. They couldn't bury her. The ground was frozen. The storm still raging, so they wrapped her in what dignity they could manage and set her in the lean-to outside. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving a world transformed by white. Taza's fever had broken, though he remained dangerously weak. Nali too clung to life, though barely. But their food was gone, and Clara knew that without help, they would all follow Ayanna's mother into the silence. "I'll hunt," Thomas announced, trying to sound older than his 9 years. "No," Clara said immediately. "You don't know these mountains. Father taught me." There was steel in the boy's voice now, an echo of both his parents. "I can track, set snares. We need food. Ma!" Taza stirred weakly. "The boy is right. Near the stream. Deer come down. Rabbits, too." He fumbled for something at his belt, pressed his hunting knife into Thomas's hand. "Remember what I taught you, patient, silent. Think like prey." Clara wanted to refuse, to keep her child close and safe. But safe was dying slowly in this cabin. At least hunting offered a chance. "Stay within sight of the smoke," she said finally. "If you see any sign of people, any sign, you run back." Thomas nodded solemnly and slipped out into the white world. The hours crawled by. Clara tended the sick, kept the fire going, melted snow endlessly for water. Every sound outside made her heart race. Was it Thomas returning, or their enemies finding them at last? When the door finally opened near dusk, Thomas stood there grinning, 2 rabbits hanging from his belt. "Used the snares, just like Father showed me," he said proudly. "There's more down there, and I found tracks. Elk, I think." That night they had their first real meal in days. Thin rabbit stew, but it tasted like a feast. The protein seemed to give Taza strength, and even Nali managed a few sips of broth. Hope, that persistent weed, began to grow again in Clara's heart. Over the following days, a routine developed. Thomas hunted and checked snares. Clara tended the sick and kept the household running. The other survivors, 2 warriors, an elderly woman, 2 children, helped as they could. They were no longer Apache or white or mixed. They were simply humans trying to survive together. Taza grew stronger slowly, though the wound still pained him. He began teaching Thomas more skills, how to read weather and cloud formations, how to make tools from stone and bone, stories that carried practical wisdom within their narratives. Clara watched them together and saw how her son absorbed both cultures, making them his own. On the 10th day in the cabin, as Clara was checking Taza's bandages, he caught her hand. "Clara," he said softly, "we need to talk truth." "You're healing," she said firmly. "Don't." "Listen." His voice was gentle but insistent. "Even if I heal fully, even if we all survive this winter, what then? We cannot run forever. Thomas deserves better than life as a fugitive. We'll find a place." Clara insisted. "Mexico or further south? And live always looking over shoulders, teaching our son to fear every stranger?" Taza shook his head. "This is not life." "Then what do you suggest?" Clara asked, though she feared his answer. "There's a man," Taza said slowly. "Indian agent named Meacham. He's different from the others, believes in justice, in finding peace between peoples. He might listen, might help. Turn ourselves in. Clara's voice rose. After everything,
Not turn in. Negotiate. Find legal way.
Taza touched her face.
I'm tired of running. Clara, tired of watching people die for us. If there's a chance, even small, shouldn't we take it?
Before Clara could respond,
Thomas burst through the door. Riders, he gasped. Coming up the valley, maybe 6. The cabin erupted in controlled panic. Warriors reached for weapons. Mothers gathered children. But Taza held up a hand. What did they look like? He asked Thomas. Not soldiers, Thomas said. Different. One wore a black coat, city clothes. They're moving slow, like they're looking for something. Taza and Clara exchanged glances. City clothes meant either law or government, possibly this agent Meacham Taza had mentioned, or possibly something worse. Everyone hide, Taza decided. Clara, Thomas and I will meet them. If it goes bad, the others run. We're not leaving you, Nantan protested. You will if I order it. Taza said with quiet authority, the children must survive. They waited, tension thick as smoke in the small cabin. Soon, horses approached, their breath steaming in the cold air. A knock came, civilized, almost polite. Clara opened the door, Taza beside her despite his weakness, Thomas behind them both. 6 men stood outside. 5 were hard-faced enforcers, hands near their weapons. But the 6th was different. A thin man in his 50s with intelligent eyes behind wire spectacles, indeed wearing a black city coat unsuited to the mountains. Mrs. Mitchell, the man said, removing his hat politely. My name is Alfred Meacham, federal Indian agent. I've been looking for you. Clara's hand found Taza's. Why? Because, Meacham said, his eyes taking in Taza's obvious Apache features, Thomas's mixed heritage, the defensive postures all around. I believe a great injustice is being done, and I might be able to help. May I come in? It's rather cold for negotiations. Clara looked at Taza, saw him nod slightly. Whatever came next, running was no longer an option. They were too weak, too tired, too few. Come in, Mr. Meacham, she said, stepping aside. But know that we'll defend ourselves if threatened. I would expect nothing less, Meacham said, entering alone while his men remained outside. Now, shall we discuss how to keep you all from hanging and perhaps, just perhaps, find a way for your family to live in peace? As the agent settled by their fire, Clara felt the winds of change blowing through their small shelter. Whether those winds brought salvation or destruction remained to be seen. But after weeks of running, of watching people die, of scraping survival from an unforgiving land, even uncertain change felt like hope. Thomas moved to stand between his parents, one hand on each, binding them together. Whatever Meacham offered, whatever price peace might demand, they would face it as what they had fought so hard to become, a family. The negotiations that would determine their fate were about to begin. And Clara prayed to any power that might listen that love would prove stronger than law, that justice might for once align with mercy. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, carrying the scent of snow and the promise of more storms to come. But inside, for now, there was warmth and light and the possibility, however slim, of a future where they could stop running. Spring came to the mountains like a gentle blessing, melting snow into streams that sang their way down to the valleys below. Clara stood outside the cabin that had been their salvation, watching Thomas help Taza repair the fence around their small garden. 6 months had passed since Agent Meacham's visit. 6 months that had changed everything. The negotiations had been long and painful. Meacham proved to be that rarest of creatures, an honest government man who saw Apache as human beings deserving of justice. He had worked tirelessly, calling in favors, bending rules, finding loopholes in the harsh laws that demanded retribution. The death of Captain Thornton complicates matters, he had said during one of his many visits. But I've found witnesses, soldiers who saw him fire first, who testified to his brutality. Self-defense is still a defense, even for an Apache and his white wife. Wife?
The word had hung in the air that day, and Clara had felt Taza's hand tighten on hers. "We're not married," she had said quietly. "Not in any way the law recognizes." Meacham had smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Well, that's easily remedied, isn't it? I happen to know a judge in Denver who owes me a favor, rather progressive fellow. Performed marriages for former slaves after the war. I think he'd be sympathetic to your situation." And so, on a crisp March morning, Clara Mitchell had become Clara Taza, or Clara Mitchell Taza, as the progressive judge had suggested, honoring both her past and present. Thomas had stood witness, beaming as his parents spoke vows in English and Apache, binding themselves in both worlds. But marriage was only the beginning. The larger challenge was finding a place where they could live openly, where Thomas could grow without hiding half his heritage. Meacham had a solution for that too. "There's a new settlement starting up in Colorado," he'd explained. Havenbrook, they're calling it, founded by Quakers and other progressive folks. They're actively recruiting mixed families, former slaves, anyone seeking a fresh start without prejudice. It's not paradise, nowhere is, but it's a chance. Now, watching her husband and son work together in the morning sun, Clara allowed herself to believe they had found their place. The journey to Havenbrook had been hard, especially for the wounded and elderly, but the town had welcomed them with cautious warmth. They were given a plot of land at the edge of town, far enough for privacy but close enough for community. Not all of their band had come with them. Nantan and 2 others had chosen to return to the reservation, preferring the familiar hardships to the unknown challenges of integration. Clara understood and respected their choice. Nali, recovered from her wounds but frail, had elected to stay, becoming a grandmother to all the town's children regardless of their heritage. "Ma! Father! Come quick!" Thomas's excited voice pulled Clara from her reverie. She hurried to where he stood by the fence, pointing at a rider approaching on the main road. Clara's hand moved instinctively to where a weapon would have been, old habits dying hard. But as the rider drew closer, she recognized the worn black coat and spectacles of Agent Meacham. "Wonder what brings him here," Taza said, straightening with some difficulty. The wound in his side had healed but left him with a permanent hitch in his movement, a reminder of their flight. Meacham dismounted with the careful movements of a man more comfortable with papers than horses. His face was grave as he approached. "I have news," he said without preamble. "Jake Morrison was found guilty of arson and attempted murder for the mission fire. He'll spend the next 20 years in federal prison." Clara felt a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying lift from her shoulders. "And the others who were with him?" "Scattered to the wind when they realized I was serious about prosecution. The new territorial governor is very interested in appearing civilized to Washington. Prosecuting white men for crimes against Apaches and their sympathizers plays well back east." "Politics," Taza said with distaste. "Politics that work in your favor. For once," Meacham corrected. "But that's not the only reason I'm here." He pulled a letter from his coat. "This came to my office. It's from Father Miguel." Clara's heart leaped. He survived. Badly burned but alive. He's rebuilding the mission. He wanted you to know that he holds no anger, only prayers for your happiness. And this, Meacham produced a small wrapped package. He said you'd understand. With trembling hands, Clara unwrapped the package. Inside was a small wooden cross and a leather-bound book, a Bible. But when she opened it, she found it was filled with handwritten notes in Spanish, Apache phonetics, and English, a book of prayers and wisdom from 3 traditions, painstakingly copied. He spent months on it while recovering, Meacham said softly. Said it was for Thomas, for when he's old enough to understand the gift of belonging to many worlds. Clara clutched the book to her chest, tears flowing freely. Taza's arm came around her, strong and comforting. "There's more," Meacham continued. "I've been authorized to offer you a position. Taza, the Bureau of Indian Affairs needs interpreters and mediators, people who can bridge the gap between worlds. The pay isn't much, but it's honest work, and it would give you legal standing that no one could challenge." Taza was quiet for a long moment, looking at Thomas, who watched with eager eyes. I would work for the same government that hunted us. You'd work for change. Meacham said simply, for a future where boys like Thomas don't have to choose between their bloods, but can claim both with pride. That evening, the whole town gathered for a celebration, ostensibly for the spring planting, but really to hear Meacham's news and celebrate justice served. Clara watched Thomas playing with the other children, no longer separated by suspicion but accepted for who he was. She saw Taza speaking earnestly with the town elders, his natural leadership recognized and respected. "You're thinking deep thoughts," a voice said beside her. Nali had approached on silent feet, as was her way. "I'm thinking about circles." Clara said, "How we ran so far and fought so hard, only to find what we were looking for was simple acceptance." "Not only," Nali corrected gently, "you found yourselves. The woman who entered that cave years ago, scared and alone. Would she recognize the woman who stands here now?" Clara considered this. That woman had been trapped by convention, by debt, by fear. This woman had faced death, had chosen love over safety, had learned that strength came in many forms. "No," she admitted, "but I think she would be proud." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red that reminded Clara of that first sunset in the cave. Taza found his way to her side. Thomas, tired from playing, leaned against his father's other side. "Regrets?" Taza asked quietly. Clara thought of Samuel, whose kindness she would always honor, of the home that had burned, the simple life that might have been, of the friends lost along the trail, whose sacrifice had made this moment possible. "Sorrow for the cost," she said finally, "but no regrets for the choice." "Father's going to take the job," Thomas announced. He told Mr. Meacham yes. "Does that mean we're staying here for good?" "Nothing is forever," Taza said carefully. "But for now, yes. This is home." "Good," Thomas said firmly. "I like it here. Mary Sullivan says she'll teach me to read music if I teach her to track rabbits." Clara and Taza exchanged amused glances over their son's head. The next generation was already building bridges their parents had barely dared to dream of. That night, in their simple but solid home, Clara unwrapped the copper bracelet she had worn hidden for so long. By lamplight, the etched eagle seemed to soar free from its metal bonds. She placed it on the mantel, no longer a secret but a symbol of the journey that had brought them here. "One night of love with the Apache warrior," she murmured, echoing words from what felt like a lifetime ago. "And years later, he came back for her heart." Taza finished, pulling her close. Though in truth, her heart was always his, as his was hers. Such poetry from a warrior. Clara teased. "Love makes poets of us all," Taza replied, "even practical Apache scouts who now must learn to push papers for the government." They laughed together, the sound filling their home with warmth. Outside, Havenbrook settled into peaceful evening, a town built on the radical notion that different peoples could live side by side in harmony. It wasn't perfect. There were still those who muttered about miscegenation, about the natural order being disrupted. But there were more who saw in families like theirs the future of the frontier, not conquest, but cooperation, not purity, but strength through diversity. As Clara drifted toward sleep, secure in Taza's arms, listening to Thomas's peaceful breathing from the next room, she thought about the long road that had brought them here, every scar on their bodies, every loss they had endured. Every moment of despair had led to this. A simple home, honest work, a community that judged them by their character rather than their blood. The Apache warrior had indeed come back for her heart, but more than that, he had helped her find her courage, her strength, her voice, and together they had given their son the greatest gift possible, the freedom to be wholly himself in a world that was slowly, painfully learning to make room for all its children. In the distance, a coyote howled, no longer a sound of danger, but simply part of the wild symphony of their new home. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their separation, their desperate flight, and now their quiet triumph. Love had conquered much, though not without cost. But as Clara felt sleep claiming her, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she would make the same choice again. Some things were worth any price, and the love of an Apache warrior, and the family they had built from courage and devotion, was chief among them. The eagle had found its sky at last, and in that vast expanse, there was room for all who dared to soar. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through the Wild West, where love transcended boundaries and courage was measured not in gunfights, but in the willingness to see beyond prejudice. I'm curious, where in the world are you listening to this story? Please leave a comment and let me know, so we can connect across distances just as Clara and Taza connected across cultures. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about their incredible journey. Did their love story touch your heart as it touched mine? Let's discuss in the comments below.